On Friday, April 21st, Disney Lorcana's co-designers Ryan Miller and Steve Warner hopped online to answer as many questions as they could about general gameplay and rules, and we learned a lot of stuff that was stumping everyone up to this point. In this video, I want to take a look at all the things we learned after this Q&A. The first thing was that neither player can look at their Inkwell. At Nurgle Probe asked, once a card is put in your Inkwell face down, is it hidden information for the rest of the game? Can the owner or both players look at what's face down? How public is the information? They responded by saying neither player can look at them and they're not public information. Furthermore, if an ability like One Jump Ahead puts the top card of your deck face down into your Inkwell, you don't get to see what the card was. So as we thought, the Inkwell is not public information. You've got to keep up with that, which leads to the second thing that I immediately thought of, which was this question asked by Literary Magpie. In a tournament setting, what information are players allowed to record? I've seen a lot of people asking if the Inkwell is public knowledge, but can banishment and other zones be tracked? Disney Lorcana responded by saying players are allowed to look at the cards in their opponent's discard piles. Inkwell cards must remain face down and cannot be looked at by any player. I found it really interesting because they didn't really answer the question on whether or not it can be recorded, which is what I would be concerned about for tournament play. So maybe we'll see that with more organized play stuff coming out, or maybe through the extended rules. We'll just have to see. Next, talking about the Inkwell, I think this is really interesting as well. Is there a way to recover a card after it was put in the Inkwell? The response was currently no. So in other words, after all this information about the Inkwell, once a card goes into the Inkwell, it's gone. There's no getting it back, and unless you keep track of it and remember both what your opponent put in there and what you put in there, you're not going to be able to have any access to the Inkwell. I think this is going to be a really important thing to be able to do if you want to be good at Lorcana, is just being able to keep track of all of the cards that go into the Inkwell, knowing the matchups to know which cards are important and how many of those cards are usually in a deck. It'll be really interesting to see how important things like this are when it comes to skill level of Lorcana. The next question we saw was by Illum Lorcana. Is there a way for two players to win simultaneously via stealing mechanics, for example? They said none currently. This doesn't tell us a whole lot, but this basically means that there's no ability in the game currently that would allow you to gain lore on your opponent's turn while they gain lore, meaning we shouldn't see very many games that end in a tie. The only way that a game might end in a tie is if you were in a tournament setting and you run out of time and have to go to turn plays, and we don't even know how all of that works yet. So far there should only be wins and losses, but we'll see what happens. The next question we saw answered was again by @Illum Lorcana. Are there any other card type plans in the future other than glimmers, items, action, songs, like places? Disney Lorcana said there's always going to be a chance for new card types in the future. We'll always look at what we think is best for the game at the time. I feel like this is to be expected. You know, with any card game, as sets keep coming, they have to innovate new and interesting things for people to play with. So this basically tells us that they're looking at the game in the long term and they're planning for its success. So I'll be interested to see what else they come up with and how soon they start to decide to implement new cards into the format. The next question we saw answered was by Adara @Okim. Can you use a character's ability that doesn't require exerting or payment the same turn they're played? Example, Sorcerer Mickey is played and then a broom is played. Does the broom get -1 ink discount? The abilities section in the quick start rules makes it seem like no. They responded by saying you can. Only abilities that require exerting the character can't be used the turn they're played. All other abilities can be used the turn they're played. So it's nice to get that clarification that if you don't have to exert the character like Mickey, you can still use that ability the turn that Mickey's played. Next, we had the big question that everyone was asking answered. Can lanterns stack? And the quick answer is yes, but also they work for shifting cost. This is actually pretty crazy in my book because it opens up a line of play where you can get Stitch Rockstar out on turn 3. You could turn 1 Stitch New Dog, turn 2 play lanterns, and then turn 3 use lanterns to shift Stitch Rockstar onto Stitch New Dog. Once you do that, on your next turn, on turn 4, you've got like 4 cards in your hand or something like that you could start playing and exerting to draw cards. This obviously makes lanterns really, really strong, and I'll expect to see them in a lot of Amber decks from now on. This is an interesting clarification by Mushu Report. He asked if I have a 3 ink character in hand that is reduced to 2 ink and I play it on the board while Stitch Rockstar is in play, do I get to draw 1 card? And the answer was the cost was not reduced. You were able to pay 1 less ink in order to play it. Its cost is still 3 and does not qualify to be a fan of Stitch. So basically, the way lanterns work is that when you exert your lantern, the card cost in your hands does not go down. So your 3 cost cards are still 3 cost according to the game. You just get to pay 1 less ink in order to actually play them. The next question we see is about organized play. It says, for organized play, will points for teaching someone or bringing a friend be able to be redeemed multiple times, or is it the first time only? Their response is you only get the points the first time you bring a specific person. If you bring more new people, you get the points. The same goes for teaching new players. So for those of you that don't know, I have an organized play video that I released before this one. I'd go check that out if you want more details on organized play. But basically you get league points for things like signing up for games, winning games, losing games, teaching people how to play, and bringing new people. This basically says that you can't teach the same person how to play over and over again, and you can't rig the system by telling your LGS owner that you brought your friend again after you and your friend have been bringing each other for weeks at that point. Next, we have a really interesting rule that I actually wasn't expecting. Jordan Heffernan says here, if I shift Rockstar Stitch on top of another Stitch, do both stay on the field just with Rockstar on top? And if I were to target this card with Dragonfire, would both cards be banished or just the top Stitch? Their answer says they both stay on the table, though the previous Stitch is completely covered up. Its abilities and numbers don't matter anymore. When a stack of characters leaves play, the entire stack goes to the same place. So if the character is banished, the entire stack goes to the discard pile. If the character is returned to the player's hand, the entire stack goes to that player's hand as well. This also includes when you let it go a shifted character. Both cards go into the Inkwell as two separate inks. An interesting clarification here though, when a shifted character is defeated, are both cards banished or just the Floodborn card? Both go to the discard, but only the top card is considered banished for purposes of effects. So basically, even though two cards get sent to your discard and two cards go into your Inkwell for Let It Go, and both of those cards that go into your Inkwell are counted as two separate inks, when you banish a Floodborn card, it's only considered as one banishing effect. So you don't banish two characters, it's just the one. There was another really good clarification. Basically, in the quick start rules, there was a contradictory statement about when do you mulligan your hand and when do you decide who goes first. They said, apologies for the confusion, we're correcting this. The proper way to start the game is to determine who's going first, then alter your hands, starting with the player that is going first. So basically, you roll to see who goes first or second. Once that gets decided, each player draws 7 cards, and the person who's going first has to decide what they mulligan. They take their mulligan, then the second player can decide to mulligan, and then you start your game. We have a question here from Citizens of Lorcana about just in time and a shift character. He asks, can I use just in time to shift, say, an Aurora Dream Guardian onto an already on the field Aurora Regal Princess without needing the ink to dry? The response is yes, as long as the actual cost of the character is 5 or less. Just in time will make the card free to play, allowing you to play Aurora as a shift. In other words, you can use just in time and either decide to play Aurora on top of Aurora, or you could use just in time and play Aurora Dreaming Guardian next to Aurora Regal Princess. There is a really good clarification here that just in time only considers the cost on the actual card. So Corey Kraus asks, can you use just in time on a shifted Stitch? Because Stitch is a 6 cost card, but his shifted ability makes him 4 cost, which would be below the 5 cost requirement for just in time. Disney Lorcana said no, Stitch is a 6 cost. Shift allows him to be played for 4, but that is not his actual cost. And to reiterate the thing about lanterns earlier, you can't exert a lantern to drop Stitch's cost to 5 and then just in time him, because when you exert a lantern, you're not actually reducing the cost of the cards in hand. We get kind of an exciting response by Disney Lorcana here, where School is Cool asks, can lore/victory points be taken away or used as a resource? We know, of course, that Aladdin Heroic Outlaw does currently make opponents lose lore, but then here's the interesting bit. Used as a resource has not been seen yet. It's been debated among the community whether or not we'll ever see the opportunity to use lore as resources, because in other games, usually your life can be used as a resource. There's all kinds of mechanics that let you take damage in order to draw cards, but we don't see anything like that here. But this indicates that at some point we might have the ability to sacrifice some of our lore in order to do something in the future, which really excites me. This wasn't exactly made clear in the quick play rules, but it's nice to be made clear now. Is there any mechanic like Magic's legendary rule to keep multiple instances of the same card from becoming oppressive? Disney Lorcana says you can have any number of the same card in play. Another great clarification is asked by Mark Wooden, does Aladdin Heroic Outlaw still get his Daring Exploit ability if he is also banished when he challenges and banishes another character? For those of you who don't know, Aladdin Heroic Outlaw says that when you challenge and banish another character, you steal 2 of your opponent's lore and you gain 2 lore. And in this case, if Aladdin challenges a character and is banished himself, if he still banishes the character he challenged, you still gain 2 lore and steal 2 lore from your opponent. The same thing would happen with Mulan. If you challenge a character with Mulan and she gets banished while banishing the other character, all of your other characters would still get +1 lore. Something else that wasn't explicitly clarified in the quick play rules, but it's just nice to know, is there an unlimited amount of cards that can be held in the player's hand? If not, how many? And are there any repercussions? Disney Lorcana says there's no limit to the number of cards in the player's hand, or the limit is equal to the number of cards in that player's deck. But seriously, you can have as many cards in your hand as you want. I think this is a great rule in the game. I really hate games where I have to decide cards to discard in my hand purely because I have so many cards in my hand. The same thing applies to your Inkwell. There's no limit to the number of cards you can put in your Inkwell. There's another interesting mechanic we learned about that might not be important now, but could be important later. We can shift onto a shifted character, meaning if you really wanted to, you could take a Stitch Rockstar and shift it onto another Stitch Rockstar. Now that Stitch Rockstar is still going to have the damage and any other effects that it had on it, but eventually we might see some sort of shift character that has an interesting ability where you would want to shift on top of it. There's also a world where you might do this if you think your opponent is going to let it go, one of your shifted characters, because as many times as you stack that shifted character, that'll be as much ink as the opponent throws in your Inkwell. So if you've shifted twice onto your Stitch Rockstar, your opponent's sending 3 ink into your Inkwell when they let it go. The next question we see is by BLS. 2 questions about colors. First, do cards need a specific ink color to be played or just a specific amount of ink? Second, will there be any generic cards with no color that can be played in any deck? Of course, we know that you don't need any specific type of ink color to play anything, you just need that amount of ink. But here's something really interesting. Disney Lorcana said we can't really answer right now about generic ink cards with no color. After seeing as much as we've seen about Disney Lorcana so far, I was under the impression that we weren't really going to see any generic cards that you can just throw into a deck. We were going to be confined to the 2 inks that we decided to run for our deck. This is really interesting though, because this leaves open the opportunity for there to be cards in the future that can be played in any deck that would be just like a generic black or maybe a white ink. I wouldn't expect anything too special from this, but I think it's just interesting that they leave that door open for now. Lee Barbs asked Disney Lorcana, does 2 Sorcerer Mickeys make brooms free? Disney Lorcana said any broom that costed 2 or less would cost 0, but don't tell Steve I told you so. First of all, I'd really like to know what kind of beef Steve has with brooms, but more importantly, we just come to see here that many effects stack. So if you have multiple Wayward Sorcerer Mickeys, they stack. And here, Whippet Plays Lorcana asked the same thing about Maurice stacking, and it looks like Maurice stacks as well. So basically, after looking at Lanterns, Maurice, and Mickey, pretty much anything that can stack will stack, which would include Aurora as well. Also, with the answer to Lee Barbs, this gives a hint that there's going to be a different broom that is more than 2 cost, or it's at least suggested, which I don't know about you guys. I'm really excited to see because I've been loving playing Wayward Sorcerer Mickey and running the brooms, just bouncing them back to hand. I'd love to see an extra set or 2 of brooms and just make that deck even more consistent. This question by Cabled really gets down to the fine print of the rules, but it's important to know for things like tournaments and gameplay. He asks, will there be some kind of rule that doesn't allow cards to be played without an effect? For example, if I announce a challenge but the only opposing characters are evasive, does my character stay exerted and is wasted, or will it go back to being ready to use for the other things? Disney Lorcana says you cannot declare a challenge, so you do not get to the point in which your character is exerted. The reason he asks this is because in some games, the rules are if you try to exert a character to challenge a character, and then realize that there's not actually a character you can challenge, you're not allowed to ready that character back and make a different play. You just essentially wasted that card for the turn. But in Disney Lorcana, because you can't challenge another character, you would just revert back to the previous game state. This doesn't clarify, however, that when you exert a character to challenge, and say you decide you actually want to quest, if you've already exerted your character and declare a challenge, you probably can't decide to quest again if there's another character there that you can actually challenge. So be careful when deciding what you're doing with your characters in game. This question and answer might make some of you kind of sad, but this person asks, are there tokens in the game? To which Disney Lorcana said none currently, which basically tells me we're not going to see any tokens in the first chapter for Disney Lorcana. I'm not sure where this would really apply to anything, but this person asked if there's a card maybe now or in the future that would reduce an opponent's lore below 0, and Disney Lorcana basically says no, that your lore cannot go below 0. I don't believe this is talking about lore on opponent's cards. I'm pretty sure this means your actual lore that you have, but regardless, when you're at 0, you can't go to -1, 2, or 3, so as soon as you start gaining lore again, you just start counting back up from 0 up to 20. Lastly, we have this question, what triggers happen in what order? Imagine playing a magical broom which has an on-play trigger in a field with Rockstar Stitch, who has the when a card is played trigger. Basically, what this person is asking is because Stitch Rockstar allows you to exert characters that are 2 costs or less to draw a card, and Magic Broom lets you shuffle a card from anyone's discard pile into their deck when it's played, what would happen first when you play a broom while having Stitch Rockstar on the field? To my surprise, Disney Lorcana said you choose the order in which to resolve your triggered abilities that trigger off at the same event. So basically, the opponent could choose if they wanted to trigger Broom's effect first, or if they wanted to exert Broom with Stitch Rockstar's ability and draw a card. The reason I say this surprises me is because I would have expected that there would have been some order of operation, something along the lines of when you play a character, if a character and an item ability happen at the same time, the character's ability happens first, or if there's two characters whose abilities go off, the priority is with the active player, or the priority is with the character that just got played, and then the other character that's been on the field goes next. But it sounds like you just have free reign for this. This opens up even more lines of play, considering you can decide when to quest, when to challenge, when to play cards, and when to put ink in your Inkwell. In my opinion, this only raises the skill ceiling for the game, so I'll be really interested to see what all people can come up with. I'm really happy Ryan and Steve decided to sit down for a while and flesh through all the questions we've had about gameplay and interaction after looking at everything with a magnifying glass. Jessica and Cassidy on the Disney Lorcana media team have been awesome at doing their best to answer all of our questions we've been bugging them with, and it's just awesome to see this level of interactivity between the players and the dev teams. That's everything we've learned from the Q&A. Gala starts today, which is a French gaming expo where we knew Ravensburger was going to be with Lorcana. We've already gotten some cards from that, and I expect more before it's over. Also, this coming week is Gamma, which we also know Ravensburger will be at. My friends Jared and James from the Citizens of Lorcana podcast and Liam from the Illumineers will be there at Gamma. Go follow them on social media. They'll be updating us with everything they can while they're there. I'll link their stuff in the description. You should also follow me on Twitter if you want to stay up to date with Disney Lorcana stuff. As soon as I see any news, I make sure to share it. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a like. Subscribe if you want to see more Lorcana content because I've got more videos planned in the future. Leave a comment telling me anything you were excited about learning from the Q&A or what you'd like to see more of from Gamma. Most importantly, make sure to take care of yourselves. My name is Brandon, aka B224, and I'll see you in the next one.